Bjorn Ironside is remembered as the son of Ragnar, but the part of his legend that should scare you does not point north. It points south, past England, past France, past Spain, through the Strait of Gibraltar, into the Mediterranean, into warm water full of rich cities that did not expect Viking sails on their horizon. This is the part most Viking stories skip. Vikings were not trapped in a world of snow and monasteries. Some of them pushed into the same sea that connected Rome, North Africa, Islamic Spain, southern France, Sicily, Italy, the same sea where empires had fought for centuries. And according to one of the most famous traditions, Bjorn Ironside sailed there with Hastein and tried to make the Viking world bigger than anything Ragnar had imagined. Subscribe for more. And now here is the real story. First, we need to be honest. Bjorn Ironside is not simple history. He is not a man we can track day by day with clean records and perfect dates. He lives in that dangerous zone where saga, chronicle.ni.paganda, and real 9th century violence all get mixed together. That is exactly why he is interesting. The show Vikings gave a whole generation one version of Bjorn Big Warrior. Big father problems balk destiny, and yes, Blee makes good television. But the real source problem is messier. In medieval stories, Bjorn is usually one of the sons of Ragnar Lothbrok. His brothers include Ivar the Boneless, Hvitserk, Sigurd Snake in the Eye, and sometimes others depending on which source is talking. Even his mother changes between stories. In one tradition, he is the son of Aslaug. In another, he gets pulled into a different family setup. Medieval writers were not building a clean family tree for a modern fan wiki. They were building reputation. That matters because the name Bjorn Ironside became more than a name. It became a container for a type of Viking hero, a son of a famous raider who had to prove he was not just living off the old man. And that is a real problem for any son of a legend. If your father is Ragnar, the bar is stupidly high. You cannot just raid one farm and come home acting special. You need a bigger map. Ragnar gets England. Ivar gets the great heathen army in the popular imagination. But Bjorn gets something stranger. Bjorn gets the south. The first thing to understand is that the Mediterranean story is not just fantasy pulled from nowhere. Vikings really did reach Spain and the Mediterranean world. Frankish and Arabic sources talk about raiders moving around the Iberian coast. They talk about ships going between Spain and Africa. They talk about the Rhone River in southern France. They talk about the Camargue at the mouth of the Rhone. This was not a little rumor, whispered by one drunk monk in the corner of a monastery. The basic fact that Scandinavian raiders reached those waters is real. The harder question is this: was Bjorn Ironside himself there? That is where the ground gets soft. A Viking called Berno appears in Frankish material in the mid-800s. Some scholars have wondered if Berno could connect to Bjorn. Later, Norman tradition puts Bjorn and Hastein together on the famous southern expedition. But that later tradition is not the same as a live battlefield report. It is a story written long after the events. So the clean version would be this: the Mediterranean expedition happened. The link to Bjorn is legendary, or at least uncertain. But the legend became powerful because it fit the world of the 9th century. And the 9th century was already wild enough. Scart in the west of France, not in Norway, not in a frozen fjord, in the Loire region, a Viking force had bases and targets along the French rivers. The rivers were highways. A longship could move from sea to river, and then into the soft interior where towns and churches carried wealth. The Franks had kings, walls armies, and politics. The Vikings had speed, timing, and an annoying talent for showing up when local rulers were busy fighting each other. In the year 858 or 859.da, depending on which source and dating system you follow, a Viking force moved south from the Atlantic world. Imagine the route on a map. From the Loire down the Bay of Biscay toward the north coast of Spain, Galicia, Asturias, then around the western edge of Iberia, past the coast near Lisbon. Down toward the lands of Al-Andalus, then the big gate, Gibraltar. To a modern viewer, Gibraltar is just a name on maps and news clips. To raiders in longships, it was a doorway into a different world. On one side was the Atlantic, hot cold, rude. Familiar enough for men who had crossed northern seas. On the other side was the Mediterranean, denser. Region, older, and politically complicated in a way the Vikings had to learn fast. This was not a video game map with fog clearing as they sailed. This was real navigation with coastlines. Currents. Essile ports. Liquid fleets. Languages they did not speak, and defenses they did not fully understand. One wrong bay, one bad wind, one fleet waiting near the shore, and the whole adventure turns into a floating graveyard. The raiders did not just stroll through Spain untouched. The sources describe resistance. They met Christian forces in the north. They met Muslim forces in the south. They attacked places near Algeciras. One tradition says the great mosque there was burned. They moved toward North Africa and Nekor, near present-day Nador in Morocco. Some accounts say they stayed there for days and took captives. Then they returned toward the Iberian coast. They hit areas around southeastern Spain. Orihuela appears in the tradition. The Balearic Islands get pulled into some versions, then southern France, then Italy. This is why Bjorn is different from the standard Viking thumbnail. The usual image is a bearded man standing in grey rain outside an English monastery. That image works. Lindisfarne is famous for a reason. But the Mediterranean story gives you Viking ships under a hotter sky. It gives you raiders who had to deal with Islamic Spain, North African ports, Roman roads, Frankish cities, and Italian walls. That changes the whole feeling. These men were not just looking for helpless monks. That is too simple. They were testing systems. They were asking a brutal question with ships. Where is the money? Where are the slaves? Where are the weak points? Who will pay ransom? Which ruler is distracted? Which city can be scared? Which coast can be hit before anyone organizes a response? That is the part people miss. Viking raiding was not random screaming. The screaming happened, sure, but the machine behind it was practical. Scouts, rumors, pilots interpret, passages, ransom deals, winter camps, alliances, betrayals. Local politics. You did not sail from the Loire to Italy by pure rage. Rage does not read the coastline. Rage does not find fresh water. Rage does not know when to leave before a stronger fleet arrives. Hastein matters here, in the tradition. Hastein is older or experienced, dangerous. The kind of raider who understands that a locked gate is not only opened with an axe, sometimes it is opened with a lie. And this brings us to the most famous scene in the Bjorn and Hastein story. The city they thought was Rome. The target was Luni, also called Luna in some retellings. It sat in northern Italy near the coast, close to the area of modern Liguria and Tuscany. It was an old city with Roman roots, to men coming from the sea, hearing stories about Rome, seeing stone walls and churches and wealth. The confusion was believable enough for later storytellers. Did Vikings really mistake Luni for Rome? Maybe, maybe not. The story is too good to trust without caution. But it shows how medieval writers imagined Viking ambition. These raiders were not content with one more coastal town. They wanted the name that meant power itself, Rome. And according to the tradition, they could not break the city by direct attack. So Hastein used a trick. He sent word that he was dying. He claimed he wanted to convert. He wanted Christian rites. He wanted burial on consecrated ground inside the city. Think about how nasty that is as a psychological move. The defenders think the threat is over. The pagan warlord is weak. He is asking for religion. He is asking for mercy. He is no longer an attacker at the wall. He is a dying man. Then the city allows him in. This is the kind of scene that would feel too ridiculous in a modern crime movie, unless the director made it ugly and tense enough. The coffin or stretcher comes through the gate. A small group of Vikings follows. The clergy gather. People lower their guard, and then the dying man gets up. The funeral becomes an attack. Agon. Do not take that as a security camera recording from the 9th century. Take it as a legendary scene with a sharp historical message. Vikings understood fear, but they also understood theatre. A raid is not only weapons. It is timing, costume, body language, trust, panic. If the story has any memory of a real trick behind it, then it is less about superhuman strength and more about social engineering. Hastein did not hack the wall. He hacked the rules of the city. That is why the story lasts. Every age has its version of this. A Trojan horse, a fake surrender, a false flag, a man pretending to be harmless until he is already inside. The Bjorn and Hastein legend belongs to that family of stories. The scary part is not that Vikings were loud. The scary part is that they could be quiet when quiet worked better. After Luni, the legend gives them a brutal punchline. They realized this was not Rome. They had taken the wrong city. If true, that is one of the darkest mistakes in raiding history. Imagine crossing Europe by sea, fighting your way past Spain, indenting the Mediterranean, storming a walled Italian city with a funeral trick, and then realizing you did not sack Rome, you sacked the wrong place. That is not a small wrong turn. That is the medieval version of planning a heist on Fort Knox and robbing a county storage office because the building looked official. But the joke has teeth. Even if Luni was not Rome, the story still tells us something big. The name Rome had entered the Viking imagination. It was not only a place, it was a prize, a symbol, a challenge. And Bjorn Quether, historical leader or legendary mask, is attached to that challenge. Then Italy. Pisa appears in the Frankish tradition. Other towns are mentioned as hit or threatened. Some accounts stretch the action wider. Sicily, North Africa, even Alexandria in later reports. The farther the stories travel, the more careful we need to be. But the direction is clear. The Vikings had discovered that their reach was not limited to the North Sea. Now think about what this means for Europe. A monastery in northern England could believe the Vikings were a northern disaster. A Frankish count on a river could believe they were a river problem. A ruler in Islamic Spain could believe they were an Atlantic coastal problem. Then suddenly the same raiding style appears in the Mediterranean. That is not just a military problem. That is a map problem. When your enemy changes the map, your old defense plan starts to look stupid. Local rulers had to react. Some paid, some fought, some chased raiders at sea. Some waited until the raiders were overloaded with loot and prisoners. That last part matters because raiders are strongest when they are mobile. They become more vulnerable when they are heavy. Gold is heavy. Captives are hard to move. Damaged ships slow the fleet. Winter camps can become traps. Victory creates weight. The southern expedition did not end with the Vikings ruling the Mediterranean. No, they were not about to replace Rome. They were not building a Scandinavian empire from Morocco to Pisa. That is YouTube nonsense if someone sells it that way. What they did was more limited and more realistic. They raided, tested, extract wealth, took captives, lost ships, survived storms, and returned with a story big enough to outlive most kings. Some accounts say they lost many ships in a storm. Other accounts say Muslim forces hit them with fire weapons or burning projectiles near the southern Spanish coast. The details vary, but the ending is not clean victory. It is damage, retreat, and survival. That makes the story better, because real raids do not end with the hero standing on a mountain while everyone cheers. Real raids end with broken ships, sick men, missing crews, wrecks over loot, prisoners who need guarding, captains blaming each other, and survivors trying to get home before the sea takes the rest. If Bjorn was part of this, he did not just become bigger than Ragnar because he won every fight. He became bigger because his legend escaped the northern box. Ragnar is tied to England and Francia. Ivar is tied to England and revenge. Bjorn is tied to the question, how far can a Viking go before the world says no? The answer was shocking, farther than most people expected. England had already been touched by Ragnar stories. Francia had already been raided. The northern world already knew the pattern. But Spain, Gibraltar, North Africa, Italy, that was different. That was Bjorn stepping onto a bigger board. This is why the title works. Bjorn is remembered as Ragnar's son. But his legend becomes bigger than his father, because it stretches the Viking story into a place the audience does not expect. Not because every line is proven. Not because he personally conquered half the south. Because the tradition around him breaks the lazy picture of Vikings as one regional nightmare. They were a mobile pressure system. They moved through weak points. They learned, they adapted, they failed, they came back. They changed route. They made deals with people they had attacked last year. They accepted silver from kings and then looked for the next coast. That was the real terror, not horned helmets. Those are fake anyway. Not endless berserkers screaming. Not the fantasy version where every warrior is 6'8" and allergic to shirts. The real terror was operational. A group of ships could appear at a coast that had heard stories, but had not prepared enough. The raid could begin before a regional ruler even understood which river mouth mattered, and Bjorn's name sits on one of the boldest versions of that idea. Now we should separate 3 layers. Lot 1. Historical movement. Vikings reached Iberia and the Mediterranean in the 9th century. This is solid enough. Lot 2. Named leadership. Some sources and later scholarship connect the famous expedition with Bjorn Ironside and Hastein. This is much less solid. The name Bjorn may connect to a historical Berno in Frankish sources, but that does not give us a full biography. 3. Saga drama. The fake death trick. The mistaken Rome. The personal ambition to become emperor. The perfect movie version. This is legend territory. Powerful, useful, memorable, but not something you treat as courtroom evidence. This does not ruin the story. It saves it, because bad history says, this absolutely happened exactly this way. Trust me, bro. Good storytelling says, here is what the sources can support. Here is what later writers added. Here is why people kept telling it. And people kept telling it because it is insane. A Viking leader sails south on Tenta's waters associated with ancient empire attack cities outside the normal Viking mental picture. Uses deception to breach walls. Maybe thinks he has reached Rome. Then discovers the world is larger and more complicated than his ambition. That is not a side quest, that is a whole movie. Look at the route again. Loire, Bay of Bisque, northern Spain, western Iberia, Lisbon area, Gibraltar, Algeciras, North Africa, southeastern Spain, the Balearic waters, Roussillon, Camargue, Rhône, Narbonne, Nimes, Arles, Valence, Luni, then back toward the west. That route is not a straight line of confirmed GPS points from one captain log, but it is the shape of the tradition and the records. It is enough for a map that feels different from every standard Viking documentary. No snow, no English monastery, no frozen shore. This is a Viking raid passing through a sea of old empires, and the Mediterranean was not passive. That part matters too. Sometimes online Viking content makes everyone else look helpless. That is lazy. The Umayyad Emirate of Cordoba was not a bunch of confused villagers waiting to be robbed. It had administration armies, fleets, mungri, cities, and commanders who could hit back. Christian kingdoms in northern Spain also resisted. Storms punished ships. Coastal defenses mattered. Local knowledge mattered. The Vikings were dangerous because they were adaptable, not because everyone else was weak. A strong enemy makes the raid more impressive, not less. If a Viking fleet can survive that route and return Devon damaged, then you are not looking at random chaos. You are looking at serious maritime skill. Their ships were not big Mediterranean galleys. They were not designed to fight in the same way as southern fleets, but they had advantages. Shallow draft, screwed, beach landing ability, river access for flexible crews. A long ship could arrive where a heavier ship could not operate the same way. That allowed Viking raiders to use coast and river as one connected battlefield in northern Europe. That changed the game. In the Mediterranean, Utley created a surprise factor. But surprise does not last forever. Once southern rulers understood the pattern, the danger changed. Watch the coast to Gort the river mouths boss strike when raiders are loaded. You use local fleets. Punish stragglers. It becomes a contest of adaptation. Viking mobility against organized defense. This is why the expedition did not create a permanent Viking Mediterranean kingdom. Raiding is not ruling. Taking loot is not the same as controlling land. A warrior who can terrify a town for 3 days may still be completely unable to govern it for 3 years. That distinction matters. It keeps the story grounded. Bjorn legend sits right at that border. He is not a king of the Mediterranean. He is a name attached to the moment Vikings looked at the south and said, "Why not there too?" And the south had to answer, what did Bjorn gain from this in legend? Wealth. Reputation. A bigger name the Dostans from his father Shadow. If Ragnar was the man who made enemies fear the north, Bjorn became the man whose story made even the Mediterranean horizon feel unsafe. That is why this episode matters more than another duel or another revenge scene. It changes the scale. In the sagas, Bjorn later becomes connected with Sweden. Some traditions treat him as an ancestor of Swedish rulers. A burial mound on Munso in Lake Malaren was later associated with him. But again, association is not proof. Medieval and early modern people loved attaching famous names to places. A mound becomes more powerful when it has a legendary owner. A dynasty becomes more impressive when it can point backward to a heroic ancestor. This is how memory works. It does not only preserve the past, it edits the past for status. So when you hear Bjorn Ironside, not imagine one clean file labeled verified facts. Imagine a stack of reports, war stories, family claims, decoric poems, botlot political memories, and later writers trying to connect them. Somewhere under that stack may be a real 9th century raider, maybe more than one. But the legend that survived is larger than the man. And honestly, that is the point. Bjorn Ironside became bigger than his father in story because he became a direction. Ragnar points toward England. Bjorn points toward the far south. He turns the Viking map sideways. And that is a nasty surprise for anyone who still thinks Vikings were only a northern problem. Picture a lookout on the coast of southern France in the year 860. He is not thinking about a monastery in Northumbria. He is not thinking about a saga written in Iceland centuries later. He sees sails, low ships, unfamiliar movement. Men coming from the sea with a reputation already traveling faster than them. He does not need the full genealogy of Ragnar. He needs the gates closed, the bells ringing, the valuables hidden, the boats pulled back. The bishop warned, the count notified, and he needs it now. That is the real Bjorn effect. A name arrives before the man, and with names from the Viking age, that can be more dangerous than proof. Because fear does not wait for footnotes. The Mediterranean story magnifies that reputation. If Bjorn can survive the south, then his Ironsides are not just for northern battles. His legend can survive heat, the Dostans, storms, Islamic fleets, Frankish politics, Italian walls, and the humiliation of maybe attacking the wrong city. That last part is important. The wrong city joke should have killed the legend. It did not. It made it better, because it showed ambition so big that even the mistake felt huge. Most failures make a man smaller. This one made the story larger. From Iberia to North Africa, to southern France, to Italy, the Viking world of violence touches places many viewers do not associate with Vikings at all. It is fresh visually, but it is also grim. A longship on blue water may look cool on a thumbnail. For the people watching from the coast, it meant a test of whether the local defenses could move fast enough. And sometimes they could. The returning fleet was damaged. Some ships were lost. Some men did not make it. Some victories were followed by punishment. The South was not a free buffet. It was a hard theatre with strong opponents and long distances. So what remains after we strip away the nonsense? Bjorn Ironside may have been a real leader, or he may be a legendary shape built around memories of real leaders. The Mediterranean expedition was real enough in its broad outline. The attachment of Bjorn and Hastein to it comes mainly through later tradition. The Luni trick is a legend with a possible memory of deception, but not a verified play-by-play. And still, the story matters. Because legends survive when they explain something people already felt. People in 9th century Europe felt that the Vikings had broken normal distance. They came by sea, they came by river, they came in summer. They stayed in winter, they took payment, they returned anyway. They did not respect the mental borders that local rulers relied on. And in the Bjorn tradition, they even entered the Mediterranean, the old center of the civilized world in European memory. That is why Bjorn becomes bigger than Ragnar. Ragnar is the father, Bjorn is the expansion. Ragnar is the old fear, Bjorn is the new horizon. Ragnar belongs to the northern legend. Bjorn proves the legend can travel by the end of the story. Do not picture Bjorn sitting quietly under his father name. Picture the map opening south, the Loire behind him, Spain along the left edge, Africa across the water, the Rhone ahead, Italy waiting, Rome rumoured somewhere beyond, the crew tired, the ships scarred, the loot heavy, the sea still dangerous, and the story already growing bigger than the facts. That is how a Viking becomes hard to separate from myth, not because he did one impossible thing, because every place attached to his name makes the world around him larger, and that is the final punch. Bjorn Ironside is remembered as Ragnar's son, but the legend that carries him does not stop at his father door. It sails out of the cold north, past Gibraltar, and forces the Mediterranean to watch the horizon for one moment. The old sea of empires had to deal with Vikings. And that is why Bjorn Ironside became bigger than his father.